Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the podcast show where I interview the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I am very pleased to be joined by Caroline Cater. Now, Caroline is the Vice President of Field Sales for Coca-Cola European Partners. She's had a wealth of experience across the nation and internationally working for a number of very, very well-known household brands. She started her career in Cadbury's, worked for other leading organisations such as Britvic, and has had a very successful career within the commercial, sales and marketing world prior to taking on the position that she is currently working in right now. Welcome to the show, Caroline.
Thank you very much, Leila. Delighted to join you.
Thanks so much for being here. And Caroline, for those listeners who perhaps don't know you as well as I do, I wonder whether you could give us a little brief synopsis of how you came to be where you are today in your career.
Okay, I guess, my career has been a long one so far, i.e. that means I'm aging rapidly, and it feels even faster over the last few weeks during COVID. But I actually left school at 16. I decided that I wanted to be in the world of work quite quickly. I joined Cadbury's on what used to be a youth training scheme. And then I kind of worked through various grades at Cadbury's and then found myself dying to get into a sales role and wanting to get out on the road, just meet customers. It felt like this far off place where everybody went and spoke to customers and they knew what was happening in the world, and I was sitting behind a desk. Ironically, something I wasn't very good at. And so I moved into sales and stayed with Cadbury's for a number of years after that. And I did my degree through the Open University, supported by Cadbury's. So I've been in a number of different commercial roles there. So field sales, category, marketing, lots of different areas, but always in commercial. And then after 17 years there, I made the difficult decision to move to another business, to Britvic. A fantastic experience there as well, where I learned lots. Most importantly, I learned how institutionalised I'd probably become in one business as much as I had loved it. So I learned a whole new world at Britvic about soft drinks, and then I jumped over the fence and joined CCEP in 2010, so just a couple of years ahead of the Olympics. So a very exciting time to join, and a time when the business has been growing rapidly and expanding across Europe. And in CCEP, I found myself in field sales and then in a marketing role in GB, then in a European marketing role, and now back into field sales to lead the GB team. I've had a very interesting career. I've worked for 3 amazing businesses. I've learned so much from each opportunity. And every day is a school day, as everyone says. There's not a single day goes by when I don't learn something new or get something that surprises me, which keeps the whole commercial area really vibrant.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing, Caroline. And what was really interesting there, and certainly resonates with me a lot, is the fact that you said you always wanted to be in sales, which for whatever reason, that is quite an unusual thing, especially when we say relate this to gender diversity. I also had a passion for sales, or at least for speaking with customers and having conversations. And, obviously I've had the chance to get to know you, and I can tell that, you're absolutely a people person. I can see why you are made for sales. But my experiences are that there are generally relatively, I wouldn't say relatively few, but certainly at the senior levels and the the level of your career that you have got to, there tends to be a disparity across the gender diversity from male to female ratios. What are your thoughts? And was this always the way when you started off in field sales back at Cadbury's? Mm-hmm.
It was definitely always the case. And I think, when you say I always wanted to be in sales, it almost makes me shudder a little bit, because I never saw myself as a salesperson. And that's because the image of salesperson, back in the day was probably someone, knocking on your door trying to sell you double glazing or Kirby cleaners, and a very hard sell. And, most people, I think, would really struggle to identify with that as a way of selling. So I think I wanted to go outside. I wanted to be outside of the business. I wanted to be talking to customers, and I wanted to be out and about, seeing in outlets. I thought it was fascinating that you could, go around stores and, walk into a shop and talk to someone about their business. So it was that part of sales that really appealed to me, and probably still does today. And I've probably spent half of my career in sales and half in marketing. And I would say that the two were far more closely linked than people realise. So, people think of marketeers as being, these creative people who sit dreaming of new ideas, and people in sales are people who go in and, make the deal happen. In reality, there's such a close line between the two. In marketing, you're trying to understand what consumers want, and you're trying to understand how you can bring value to a consumer and you can create something unique for them. You're doing exactly the same in sales. You're trying to understand what your customer wants. You're trying to understand what their objectives are. You're trying to find a way that, you can make your brand relevant or your portfolio relevant to that customer's business. So little difference, and yet people, particularly when they're quite young in their career, I mentor a lot, or have mentored a lot of people in the past, who'll say, I really want a career in marketing, but wouldn't dream of sales, because particularly females, because they have this image that it's a hard sell. So I think just to go into, I guess, a little bit more detail about that. When I talk to people and they say, no, sales isn't really for me, or even if they've got so far in their career in sales and they've got to a middle manager level, but they don't see themselves as being a sales director, or they don't see themselves getting to senior leadership level, I usually, drill a little bit deeper into that with them and say, well, what is it about sales that you don't think is right for you? And they will usually say things like, I'm just not very good at the negotiation, or I don't like the confrontation, or, I just don't have the right sort of mental mindset for sales. I can't do this sort of going out and talking to customers about something that I don't personally feel good about. And when I hear those things, I always feel quite happy, because I think excellent, because sales is absolutely not about that. And in fact, some of the worst experiences that I've seen over the years with salespeople, and they have been very fixed in their views, they've had a very sort of win-lose mindset, and they've tried to persuade someone to do something that's not right for them. And frankly, that's sales. That's just, bullying people into a corner, and it rarely works, or it certainly doesn't work in the long term. I try to focus a little bit more in those discussions on, try and find common grounds, with the person that you're talking to. Try and understand what their needs are. Try and spend some time exploring, what they think the growth is of their business. Ask lots of questions. When you really feel like you understand their business, don't try and, nail the sale, in the first breath. Try and think hard about, well, what have I got that would work? And be honest if you don't think you've got something in common. And different levels of selling require different skills, but there's no doubt that the same things around understanding and questioning and the number one thing that are the most important things. And quite often, ironically, they're the things that, women tend to, I don't want to say women actually, people's female traits tend to have, much more confidence with that communication, questioning, finding common ground, setting a future vision. So, I firmly believe men and women can be fantastic at sales, and it's just really understanding what the different ways of selling are, what's successful for you.
This is such an interesting subject, and I love the fact that you brought up what are pretty archetypal now, I would say, stereotypes for sales, but it's absolutely true. Now, when you think of sales, people do instantaneously think of this, no offense to any double glazing sales people who are listening in, but they do think, you kind of double glazed, double glazing sales, bad suit, bashing on doors, kind of shoving yourself in to force you to sign on the dotted line, when, absolutely in reality, it is absolutely not the case. And it's just brilliant that we are really challenging this norm on this podcast, because it is something that I believe true. I mean, it is what makes the world go round. Let's be honest. Everything, when you talk about things in the context of this being commercial, using the broad brush of commercial or sales and marketing, it feels far less scary. But obviously, with my other hat on, doing a lot of exec search, I have the same thing. So when I'd be speaking to, and again, don't want to stereotype here too much, but speaking to women and girls in specific, they would say, oh, as long as it's not sales, worried about, difficult KPIs and all this kind of stuff, when actually, if you are a strong communicator, and again, arguably without being too stereotypical, women do have a different way of approaching communication, often in a slightly softer way. Emotional intelligence and really being consultative in that manner is key. So to your point on the whole power of the power of the question is actually almost more important than anything else. Great sales and commercial people are listening, they're listening, observing, they're helping to articulate what the other individual wants. And so it is a great, great, great career for someone who loves all of those things, communicating, engaging, and also working out how you ultimately can make the customer happy. It's just fascinating.
I think it's right. It is, and I think the other thing though that it really calls out is the fact that you really do need those role models particularly in sales. And I think that's where, if you're in that position and you're looking up and thinking, I can't see anyone like me, and it's the same for so many people when we talk about inclusivity and diversity. If you're not seeing people like you, and that doesn't mean that they have to look like you, but people who act like you. If you've never seen an introvert in a sales role and you're an introvert, you'll assume that you can't do sales because you've never seen it done that way. So I think, trying to explain, and trying to, call out the importance of role models. And when you do see, in particular, female role models going into big sales jobs, I kind of look at them and think, please be yourself. Please don't try and, morph into the team that you've just joined. Please don't, lose all the things that maybe you've had up to this point that you now don't think are appropriate anymore. I just think that's such a crying shame. So my call out is usually, yes, sales can be for everyone. Sales is something you do in your way, because it is about communication, as you say. And then, make sure you're true to yourself when you're in a role where other people are looking at you. So, one of the things, we've seen over the last few weeks and months is this piece around vulnerability and, just being really comfortable saying, when you're not feeling okay, saying when something isn't working, those kind of areas, again, give people confidence that they look up and think, oh gosh, yeah, I have bad days. Yeah, that's okay. Well, I can still do that job and have a bad day. That's all right. So I think more than ever, I really hope that, as we come out the other side of some of the scenarios we have in front of us at the moment, that we'll be in a more positive place and people will consider different careers and consider what they would bring to a different career.
Mm-hmm. I fundamentally agree. And on the piece about vulnerability, you're absolutely right. This is something that we are seeing far more. I would almost say in abundance, to be quite fair, because everyone at the moment is feeling the effects, and unfortunately often adverse effects. And it is by sharing and talking that we really do actually, we almost are able to help one another. And so those skills of kind of listening, empathizing, being potentially emotional and vulnerable are critical. And I think, you'll have seen this yourself, I'm sure, with your teams, and I often see it is when you are brave enough almost to show that vulnerability and say, look, you know what, this is absolutely, it's been such a challenging time. I've really not felt myself, often leaders and individuals really suffering when it comes to mental health right now as well. When you are willing to open up and share those elements of yourself and your personal feelings almost, you find actually that people are then willing to share their stories as well. And so it has this wonderful kind of ecosystem effect where people start to actually share, and the cycle goes around. But you're absolutely right on your other point as well when it comes to role models, and indeed real models, because those that we are surrounded by are very big influences to us. And I think, it is difficult. Certainly when I was working my way up, I guess, in my career and, early days in kind of sales and recruitment, which is a pretty tough environment. Quite a few comparables, many used to draw between that and Wolf of Wall Street. And I thought, oh, good God, I certainly do not want to be like that. I really want to do it in my own way. And just someone almost making a reference like that is enough to put you off the life, frankly. But having people in your world that have been there, seen it, done it, and are willing to maybe share their challenges and the successes makes the world of difference, absolute world of difference.
I had a very funny experience quite early on in my career when I was in wholesale. So I spent, I think over the course of my career with two different businesses, I spent 7 years in the wholesale channel. And at that point, there were very, very few women in wholesale. And I went on what was the National Association of Convenience Stores annual conference, and it was always a very good, sort of study tour. So you'd learn more about another market, and then they'd have a big expo and a conference for everyone in convenience. I got the offer to go when I was with my employer at the time, and I was really excited, thinking, gosh, this is going to be an amazing trip. And we were going to the US, so we were going to New Orleans and Dallas. And again, first time in the US, so I was really excited. And when I saw the delegate list, it was kind of 48, 49 men and me going on this trip. And my heart sank, and I remember thinking, oh no, suddenly in this trip I've been really looking forward to, I'm now going to have 6 days, because it was, a long old trip, 6 days with this group. And I think there were 2 people that I knew, one that worked for Cadbury as I did, and one that I knew from elsewhere. And I was really worried, and I thought about pulling out, and I thought, oh, I'm not going to be okay with this. This is not good. And I felt like I was going to have 6 days of work back to back. Anyway, I got on the coach that picked us up, because we all met at the same point. We all got on the coach. And, I could feel, all these eyes boring in me, and I almost felt like they were looking at me and going, oh, who let the girl on the stag do? It was kind of like that. That was kind of how it felt. And that was going on in my head. I have no idea if that was what was going on in their heads. But what I can say is that after sort of 6 days that closely, with a group of people going, from one event to another, from one meeting to another, seeing different things that none of us had experienced before, properly getting to know people over dinner every single night, lunch events. By the end of it, I think all barriers were removed. And I think it would probably be safe to say that I felt extremely comfortable in their company. They felt extremely comfortable in mine. And it was a situation that from the outside looking in, I couldn't imagine anything worse. But I learned so much in that week just about, assumptions that you have about other people, and assumptions about what people think of you. And most of it goes on in your own head. That was one of my biggest lessons around D&I before it really existed, I have to say.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great example there, and picking up on one of the things that you said, from the outside looking in. And I think that's so key as well, because I had a very similar experience, and I have to say I nearly pulled out too. There was 100. It was from individuals from the grocery industry. I won't mention the event that it was, but lots of seniors there. The organizer said, oh yeah, no, the number of women has increased twofold. And I was like, excellent. And so it'd gone from, I think it was like 3 to 6, and I was like, amazing. I thought, oh good God. But yes, no, we absolutely are, we can be our worst enemy, I think, and it is very easy to judge a scenario from the outside looking in, as we all do. But at the same time, it's also understandable, really. It can be very intimidating. And I found myself feeling a tad intimidated on this particular event, and kind of shuffling around, feeling like I didn't belong. But, absolutely, it is in our heads. We cannot, necessarily tar the other sex with all the same brush, but you are aware of being different. And, I think the same is true of many of the other different facets of diversity, whether it be gender, whether it be invisible diversities like mental health or LGBTQ+, whether it be, race, religion, etc. But there are notable statistics that do say, I think 30% is kind of the golden number, or so they say. If there are 30% or less of someone that you might relate to, perhaps on an initial basis or on the physical diversity side, it's a lot more difficult to actually have the confidence to have your voice heard. And that's a big part of it. It's the inclusiveness and the belonging that's almost more important than the diversity itself.
Yeah, and I think it is making sure, not listening too hard to the little voices that are giving you the bad vibes. And I've always, I don't know if it was my mother or a teacher at school that once said to me, assume positive intent. And that stuck with me, and I do tend to assume positive intent. So, you're looking at a group of people and you think, the little voice might kind of go, oh, they're not going to find what I say of any value, or they're looking at, you just kind of go, no, they're not. They're just looking in your direction. Just go over and talk. So I think, I still have days and events that I go to where I have to really force myself into that space, and I'm quite an extrovert. So, I can totally imagine what it's like if you're less experienced at that, or if you're a bit more introverted. I can totally understand that.
Thanks so much for sharing that. And I think what's very interesting is, and often it almost gets worse the more senior you become. And I obviously am very privileged to be able to speak to senior leaders like yourself, but it's amazing how many senior individuals that you might not think from the outside would have imposter syndrome or have a couple of concerns about the level of expertise in the room. Actually, it's incredibly common. And so when we walk into these rooms and have that bit of fear, you know, and it's like, oh, better get a drink before speaking to anyone kind of scenario, and you know, actually probably everyone else is feeling exactly the same.
Yeah, I think it's far more common than you realise. Far more common. And you often, another thing I've learned over the years, maybe from my years in sales, is ask lots of questions. You know, it's the easiest way to network. You know, again, you assume that you're going to have to think of things to say about yourself, and the reality is, if you just start asking questions, then the conversation flows, and it just takes that pressure off of, you know, I think, you know, keep going, keep asking questions, and eventually you'll find something that will be a common point that you'll be able to strike up more of a conversation on, or more of a connection on. It makes life a little bit easier.
I think that's really valuable advice, and I completely concur. You know, those question asking piece, but also the genuine interest in wanting to know more about the other person is a real great icebreaker. And just drawing upon something that you'd said previously when it comes to almost, how do I put it? I suppose in my personal experience, I found as I was developing throughout my career, I felt the need to try and fit in or be a bit of a chameleon almost, and try and adapt my personality because I didn't feel I fitted in. And you know, I think in sales that is something that often comes across quite strongly, because we envisage these gregarious kind of individuals saying, you know, sell me this pen or whatever it might be, and you kind of think that you have to be that way in order to fit. Now, you said very interestingly, what's very important is to be yourself, not to try and be anyone else, because actually when you let your true self shine, naturally what you're doing is you're building relationships in sales, and so people buy into you and why you are your authentic self. I wondered, when you kind of look back over the span of your career, and certainly in the early days, were there challenges? Did you experience the feeling of trying to fit in? How did you manage to almost let your full and authentic self come to the forefront? And I asked that question specifically because I have over the time observed some great women in sales, you know, maybe, you know, from the early days where there really were no women in sales. And unlike yourself, they have very, what I would deem, again, without stereotyping, very kind of masculine sales characteristics almost. And I thought, ooh, that's interesting. I wonder whether they were like that. I wonder whether that is a learnt behavior, almost the, you know, the nurture versus the nature, and they've learnt that from just being surrounded by these types of individuals.
Yeah, well, I can certainly give you a personal perspective on that, because I think when I think about myself, you know, socially, myself every day when I'm with my friends, you know, I'm generally a very, you know, pretty sociable, pretty easygoing person. And then I guess when I started to progress in the early stages of my career, I definitely felt myself becoming more corporate, you know, to the extent that people would sometimes describe me as being, you know, quite corporate, or, you know, it's just silly games and people try and guess your career and they guess an accountant. And again, no offence to accountants, and I'd be thinking, how on earth do they think I'm an accountant? So I can remember, you know, at times feeling like I was kind of losing myself a little bit. And I think I managed usually to stay true to who I was, but I wasn't maybe always as open, you know, showing my full personality. You know, maybe I'd sit in a meeting and I'd be a bit quiet, and I'd, you know, be thinking about what I needed to say and, you know, how it would come across. Maybe thinking a little bit too much about what other people's reaction was going to be rather than what I thought. And there was definitely a low point in my career when I can remember sitting in a meeting, and it was really difficult meetings, probably about 15 years ago. As we were sitting in this meeting and the conversations were going around, questions were coming up, I can remember somebody asking me a question, and I was thinking, I honestly don't know what my point of view is. And it was like a point where I look back now and think I was so lost at that particular moment that I actually didn't know what my point of view was on an area that I was very knowledgeable about. And it was very much that, you know, a lack of confidence. I got to a point where I wasn't feeling, you know, I was in a safe environment anymore. I wasn't feeling like I was able to be myself to an extent, that I could actually think about my point of view. And you know, thankfully, it was relatively short-lived. And I remember coming out the other side of it and thinking, I need to change something here, and I did. But I look back on it now, and I guess when I have career conversations with people now, or mentoring conversations with people, and in particular, I get so sad when I see a lot of people burn out in their career. And I see people sometimes burn out, and I think, burnout in particular when it happens, I think is very, very sad. But actually less than burnout, when people start to say, oh, I'm not sure corporate's for me, I think I want to go and work on my own, I think I want to work for a small business. And I see really, really good, talented people who've got to a certain level that then suddenly something changes and they don't think it's for them anymore. And I look back on that moment in my career, and that's exactly what I was feeling at that point. I felt like there was something wrong with me in this environment. I'd lost my perspective, I'd lost my ability to think properly, and somehow just through some, confidence building, through, getting a change of scene, through getting a different role, and through, someone else saying, you can do this, we're going to give you this opportunity, my confidence came back. And it was, all of the skills that I had, all of my ability was there all the time, but somehow I couldn't reach it anymore. So I think in my discussions with people who get to that point, I really spend a lot of time trying to help people reconnect with, you haven't lost that person, and a lot of the time, it's the context that you're in that is making you feel uncomfortable. Or, sometimes, if I look at difficult parts, of my career and other people's career, you look at the scenario that was around you and the level of support and challenge you were getting. And if the level of challenge was so much higher than the level of support, then the chances are that's not sustainable. So, I think we've got a huge responsibility as line managers, as leaders in organisations, to look for the people who go from hero to zero very quickly. That always worries me when I see people going from hero to zero, because it usually means that the context has shifted and it's not always their issue. And in those scenarios, we have to go looking for what's changed, and we have to look for the patterns and say, is it the individual, or are they having a tough time, or is it the line manager? They might be hitting their results, but they might not be doing it the right way. And I think it's fascinating. I just think there's so much opportunity and so much to be learned from your own low points. That's why it's good to talk about it. That's why it's good to share it, because hopefully other people will take something from it, and it reminds you as well. It reminds you that we're all fallible, and we've all got moments of greatness and moments of weakness, and the more we can share and explore both, the better.
Couldn't agree more. I absolutely could not agree more. And I'm sure those who are listening back to this podcast, as I was when you were speaking just then, very articulately, which was just ideal, I was thinking about the low points I've had, and it absolutely is about that support. You very, very right that leaders have got that responsibility, and they really have. As much as we analyze data and analyze metrics and all this kind of stuff and look at our P&Ls, shouldn't we be doing the same about our people? And I think those in sales in specific, perhaps to a degree more susceptible, because it does have those almost those emotional roller coaster pieces associated with it. 1 minute, everything's great with the customer. You almost, and I've done it, I pin my success on what the customer thinks. And if you almost feel their emotions, if something then goes wrong. And so you end up on this constant kind of crest of a wave all the time. But as you say, this is normal. This is normal for everyone across the entire board, and having that support network, and having someone who you can look up to in a mentor capacity, that you can feel safe enough to actually talk about these things, makes absolutely all the difference. And interestingly, I was talking to someone the other day about the differences between mentorship and also sponsorship. And again, I am talking a lot here about gender, but there are statistics that say that women in leadership and women in business are over mentored and under sponsored. Having someone there who's actually willing to give them opportunities and really almost speak about them positively when they're not there. Because if that happens, and if there is the confidence that comes in from a number of different places, it makes all the difference. I'm sure you'll remember as much as I do, if I get an email with someone with a little bit of gratitude, or someone says, you know what, did a great job. I mean, you kind of suddenly shoulders back, riding high and feeling great. And literally, it's those really small human pieces, as you say, none of us are, fallible. Actually, those little bits of encouragement and those little supportive mentors and guiders who are there for us when we need them the most are absolutely critical. And the famous saying goes that we learn the most about ourselves when we go through tough times. I think there's absolutely a lot of truth to be said about that.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think it's not for me, and I know you didn't say this, Leila, but it's not a male or female thing there either. I think that's exactly the same for both. I think men and women need exactly the same support and challenge. I just think we've just got to be extra vigilant in looking for when people need it. And sometimes it's more obvious. I think if you're more confident with your views, you'll sometimes ask for the help more that you need, or you'll be more demanding. And that's sometimes more associated with sort of masculine traits. But I think in reality, men and women need support. They need challenge. They need vision. And you need people to pick you up when it's not going so well.
Absolutely. It is, asking those people that don't necessarily put their hand up or don't necessarily put their head above the parapet, often the ones that we need to ask the questions to more, because there's always, if we go in a board meeting or any kind of meeting, there's always one or two that maybe, speak more, which is, not a bad thing, but paying attention to some of the small details and the things that are not said is critical. And before we run out of time today, Caroline, I'd love to just go into what we call the lightning round. And I know that you've listened to podcasts before, so you know what is coming. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer each of the next couple of questions that I'm going to ask. And I'm going to start off with one of the biggest ones first, if that's okay, which is, what would you say has been or is your secret to success?
I think it is assume positive intent. I mentioned it earlier. I think assume positive intent, and it usually gets you, it puts you into the other person's frame of mind, and it makes you think a bit more broadly.
And advice that you would give to anyone who is feeling a little underconfident or vulnerable at the moment? And of course, there's a lot of this during the present time, but is there any advice or kind of pearls of wisdom that you can impart with the listeners and myself?
I think it's very hard to impart pearls of wisdom when you don't know the individual you're imparting it with. However, having said that, I would say if you're having a bit of a crisis in confidence, find the person that always makes you happy and always makes you feel better about yourself. Have a conversation with them, have an agreement with them that, when you're having those moments that you're going to talk to that person, and they'll help remind you of what's good about you. And then look back on the positives, try and capture some of the positives that have gone before you, and, use those as fuel for, the days when you're running out.
Great answer. I love that. Positive fuel. That's brilliant. And are there any particular inspirations that you've had across your career or indeed your life? It could be on the personal side as well.
Yeah, I have to be careful with this one because I often get emotional with this one. But my greatest inspiration is always my mum, because she's an incredible lady. She's 76. She won't thank me for sharing that. Not that she'll listen to a podcast. But she, at a very young age, lost my dad, and then carried on going from sort of part-time work to look after the family to then getting a full-time job where she ended up, eventually running a call centre for nursing homes, care homes. And she was just amazing. She went from not driving, not having a career, to suddenly driving, raising 3 kids, having a career, doing so much for the church that she still does today. And she's just one of those people that's always positive, always a real inspiration to me. And, I always look up to her and think, gosh, if I could be half as good as my mum, I'd be the happiest person in the world.
Oh, that's so lovely. And you're going to have to make sure that she does listen to this podcast now.
Leila, I can't persuade her to get a mobile phone, so I definitely know she won't listen to a podcast.
Get her online. She can watch it online as well. That's just that's just so lovely. Really, really lovely. And finally, I wonder if you could go back in time and give the young Caroline advice, or indeed anyone else who is kind of, at that point, 16, thinking about what they're going to do for their career. What might you have said?
I would definitely say listen to what's in your heart, and listen to your little voice. So one thing we talk about at work is listen to the little voices, because it gets out on the table what the issues are, and when the issues are on the table, you can actually deal with them. So it's a concept that I've loved for the last 3-4 years since we've been using it in the work context. I think it's fantastic. So listen to your heart and listen to your little voice.
That is such a wonderful way to end the podcast. Thank you ever so much, Caroline, for being here today. It's been a joy having you on.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline. By way of a summary, as I always do, there's been a lot of key learning points, and I really hope that everyone who's listening in today has really enjoyed this podcast as much as I have. I think in specific, if you're considering a role in sales at the moment or transitioning into a role in sales, I hope this has given you a little push in the right direction to believe that sales is something that everyone can do. It doesn't matter whether you're male, female, how you identify. Literally, sales is a wonderful, wonderful career, an opportunity, as Caroline has said, to really be yourself and to really look at building deep and meaningful relationships, using the heart, using the emotional intelligence, and actually thriving from that. If you are feeling underconfident at the moment, I think now is a particularly difficult time for all, given circumstances of COVID. Do find someone, as Caroline has said, that makes you smile. Now, I love the positivity and the vulnerability that's come out of this podcast. I personally thoroughly enjoyed it because of that. I think vulnerability, humility, and genuine authenticity, as well as being willing to be a shoulder for someone else, is absolutely critical. Let's support as many people as we can, and in particular those that perhaps are not quite as loud or as vocal as others. But again, if you want any further advice, or if you have been affected by anything at all during today's podcast, please don't be a stranger. Please feel free to reach out. And if you didn't manage to make notes on the podcast or wanted to re-listen, you can do on demand. You can check out our show notes at the end of today's show. Visit www.dialglobal.org/podcast, and all of the information that you need will be in there for you. In the meanwhile, look after yourself and stay safe, and we'll see you again very, very soon. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.